Happy New Year, Jeff. And
Happy New Year, Greg.
we
Can't
are
believe it.
back.
Yes.
Second
Here's to
episode.
saying, and I'm hoping we get our kicks in 26, okay? That's my byline.
Yeah, I'm hoping 26 is a better year for me too.
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah.
anyways, welcome back to the Plane Crazy TV podcast. I'm Greg Lightbourn from Aviation Artifacts on Arrowverse, the very best in streaming aviation. And I'm here again with Captain Jeff Whitesell. And so, Jeff, what have you been up to over the past few weeks? I know you were in Montrose for a little bit.
I've been going up there, as you know, working on the Constellation. We're trying to still doing a lot of fine tuning, dialing the airplane in. Still got to go back and get some more interior work and more air conditioning, heating work. So, and my poor wife, I get home from one of those trips and bless her heart, she says, "Well, did you get it done?" And I keep explaining, honey, it is never going to be done. I mean, we keep chipping away at it, but a magnificent, amazing airplane, incredible process, but still a long way to go. A lot of fine tuning before we get the airplane really where we want it to do the missions for this year, which are going to be amazing.
Yeah. Is it going to go up to Oshkosh this year again?
Unknown. I'm pretty sure we're shooting for Sun and Fun, which is coming up really fast. Don't know about Oshkosh. We were there last year, so I don't know if we're going to do it 2 years in a row or not. Haven't heard.
Right.
But got to go again on Sunday to keep chipping away at the big list.
Yeah. 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 Well, we'll have to maybe, if we can, we'll do a podcast from there one time. That would be pretty fun.
That would be pretty cool. Do it from the cockpit. Show all the
Yeah.
people
Yeah.
all the gauges. That is
Yeah.
a classic flight engineer's airplane. I think I don't remember the numbers. I think I have 54 gauges and the pilots only have 16. So that tells you something, right? Flight engineers
Yeah.
running the show.
Hey, well, listen, the last podcast we did, we kind of just jumped in and we didn't really say, we talked a little bit about who you are and what you do, but I recently asked you for kind of a list of things that happened in a timeline in your life and kind of showing how early you got into aviation and as the years went by, what happened and all the different points in your varied career. And you sent me a kind of a timeline of that, and it talks about when it begins with a story about when you were 6 years old at Flying W when you started working on stuff, but last night you sent me a text of a photo of your father in front of a Widgeon,
Yep.
and you looked into when he had that plane, and talk a little bit about what you said in that text to me.
Well, first I got to thank you because that quest for information sent me diving into the many boxes that I've got stored. And I'm thrilled to report that one of the logbooks that I thought I had lost, I lost my mom's house in a big flood in Ormond Beach years ago. I thought that logbook was gone. To my surprise, I found it in the bottom of the box, which really helped, fill in a lot of the blanks there and got me thinking about some of the earliest flying. And one of my earliest memories was the Widgeon that Dad had. He used to land on the Delaware River and taxi up. There used to be a seaplane dock right there in downtown Philadelphia, literally at Market Street. And businessmen could climb out of the float plane and go to work and climb back in and go back home. And I distinctly remember crawling through the little hatch and the little tunnel underneath the nose of the Widgeon there and opening the hatch and handing the bow line to the dock hand. And I didn't realize, but I looked the airplane up and looked up when we owned it, and I was 5.5 years old. So my father is guilty of child abuse because I was warped about seaplanes from the time I was toddling. So
Child labor.
Yeah. And, I felt pretty important opening that hatch and handing that line. And
I guess.
yeah, it was cool. For years there, I thought everybody grew up that way, but obviously I was very, very fortunate to be exposed to such amazing adventures. And like you said, it started at Flying W. Many, many thrills and spills along the way.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, then I'm looking at this list, and one thing that really stands out, well, like you had a couple of things like, playing hooky when your dad took you on the seaplane adventures and things like that. But when I'm looking at a certain period, there's from 1971 when you were 17, you soloed in a glider, but then it's kind of like in really fast succession, all of these things that happened shortly after that, like almost like within a 5-year period. I mean, you did all kinds of things. Like you started with soloing in a glider, and then you soloed the same age at 17 in a powered airplane.
Yeah, there were a couple of formative moments there. I was a typical snot-nosed teenager, rebellious, and working there at Flying W, and presuming that that would last forever. I was way too cavalier about the opportunities to fly. My dad had a flight school right there. And I mean, the flight instructors were there, the airplanes were there. But I was distracted as teenagers can be, and I was content to just tinker around with the airplanes and work on them and play my guitar and chase girls. And the winter of 70, I guess, I think, we had a Learjet, one of the first Learjets, and Dad was flying charters in it, and it landed at Flying W there in the slush and snow. And when he parked the airplane, the brakes locked up, and he was trying to leave again, and I was the one that got to crawl underneath the wing of the airplane and spray isopropyl alcohol. Now it's 25 degrees and there's slush on the ramp, and I'm crawling underneath this airplane. The wing was only about 2.5 feet above the ground, so you're literally on your hands and knees spraying this isopropyl alcohol on the brakes, and you'd slush back out and go to the cockpit and give the brake release signal, and he'd shake his head and it didn't release, and I'd crawl back under there. It was freezing. And about the sixth time I crawled out from under there and looked at him, he's sitting there in the jet with the engines running with his shirt sleeves. He's warm. I'm cold. And finally the brakes relief and he takes off and I watch him arc up into the sun headed for Florida. And my little brain is going, pilot, mechanic, pilot, mechanic. The lights came on that, hey, stupid, you don't have to do this. You could learn to fly. And that epiphany came. It was very, very poorly timed because multiple events transpired and we got forced out of Flying W. And we moved to the neighboring airport there with a few airplanes and a few clients that we were able to salvage from that. So the going got really tough. And my sudden awareness of how expensive it was and the fact we had no money, I double clutched into fifth gear and I pushed hard to get my ratings. And that's why that all happened in short order.
Right.
Yeah, I think my first solo was in July of 71. And by February of 73, I had the private. And then just like 5 months later, I had the commercial multi and instrument ratings.
Yeah, you started flying in the big airplanes.
Well, I'd been flying in them. It was almost comic when I went to take my private pilot's license. I hadn't really had very many formal actual flying lessons. I didn't go to a conventional school like most folks do. Dad had had these DC-3s and Convairs and C-46s and Twin Bonanzas and all those airplanes around, and I tagged along and went on a lot of the trips. And that's how I learned how to fly. It sounds bizarre. When I showed my logbook to John Duster there at Allentown, he says, "You got 64 hours in the right seat of a jet commander. You're not even a private pilot. You can't log that." And I said, well, let's look it up and see if we can. And back then it said for co-pilot on jets that a pilot had to be in the right seat. And as a student pilot, you qualified as quote unquote a pilot. So I had some 70 hours in jet commander and didn't even have a license. Yeah, I'd been exposed to a lot of, really unique big airplanes before I even got the private pilot's license. So what was cool is once I had done that, you've heard me talk about those 4 cursed columns, the instrument, cross-country, multi-engine. Those are the hardest columns to accumulate time in. Luckily, I had a lot of the preliminaries out of the way, even though a lot of it was quote unquote dual given. If you had an instructor in the airplane with you, you could log it. But no, it was certainly not a conventional path to, the license. Certainly not the path that most folks took.
Right. So let's start with the like you soloed in a glider, like in a sailplane at 17. I know a couple other pilots that are from the old school of piloting that ended up flying the great big. I mean, you ended your career with Delta flying, what was it, 747s, and
Yeah,
you know,
747, and the very last airplane I flew was a 777. And yeah, the flying of sailplanes is so essential. If I could wave a magic wand, I would put the schools back together here in the United States in a different way. You would learn how to fly in a glider first and foremost. Then I'd put you in a seaplane, put you on the water. And then after we've done that, we'll go out and learn how to do the radios and the cross country and navigation and the fancy airplanes. And I think it's essential, when you fly a glider, there's no engine. You have to be very good at a thing called energy management, which in essence is what flying an airliner is all about. You've got an airplane that weighs 500,000 pounds. You got to point it at the destination and point it at your goal. And the good news is you've got plenty of power and everything. If it doesn't work out, you can go around. Well, in a glider, you can't. You've got to make your energy management count, literally till you come to a stop. And I think that foundational stuff is something that we've lost in flying with the pilots that I see now. And, some of the incidents that I've seen recently, especially, we got to get back to those fundamentals. It's crucial.
yeah, and I've heard the same thing from a couple of other pilots that flew the big jets for careers, and they started out in sailplanes, and they said it helped them more often than anybody would imagine. Just
Well,
knowing and having learned in sailplanes, knowing how to manage that energy.
there's a couple classic incidents that, you can look up. There was a 757 that ran out of gas years ago, and they landed it on a drag strip, and they were able to fly the airplane back out of there. That fellow was a glider pilot. I'm pretty sure if I recall correctly, that Sully, who put the jet in the river, was a glider guider. Yeah, there's ample evidence that it's formative, it's foundational, it's fundamental. Now, if I could figure out a way to make it profitable, and get the industry back, where they're flying gliders first, that'd be cool.
Yeah. And you recently located that very glider that you soloed in, and it's still around, correct?
Yeah, I've lost track of it. It was for sale, and now I can't find it. So, someone's probably rebuilding it. But yeah, it'd be fun to go see that for sure. I don't know why I'm so attached to it. It's pretty special moment, I guess. I tracked down
Yeah.
the steerman that I did the first solo in. Unfortunately, that airplane's been destroyed in an accident, and I don't think anybody's rebuilding it because all that was left. I mean, you could maybe salvage the data tag and start over. There wasn't much left. But yeah, it's been really fun, trying to track down some of these old airplanes.
Yeah. And we have a couple of photos of you in that Stearman when you soloed. And I think we even have some video footage of that.
We just
So,
found that. That was the last thing I sent to you, and I was astounded because we'd lost it. It was Super 8, and the first bit of it was recorded and got overexposed because the guy with the camera opened the camera before the film was rewound. But the first landing was on a different piece of film and was thrown in a box here in the many boxes that I have. Spool of Super 8 film was labeled Cats, and it had a whole bunch of video of my mom's cats. And at the beginning was my first solo.
wow. That's a
Yeah.
lucky find.
Yeah.
Lucky
Well, I was
find.
just the only reason that I found it at all is because I just decided to make a wholesale haul of all these things over to the place to have them digitized.
Yeah. So between July of 71, when you soloed in the sailplane, between that date and June 4th, 1974, on your 20th birthday, that's when you got your airline transport rating. That's an incredibly short timeline for you to get all these ratings. And then all of a sudden you've got an airline transport rating, and was that what led into, it looks like you were at Ohio State at that time, but that's kind of what led into you flying in the Corrosion Coroner era, correct?
Well, when I graduated from Ohio State, I tried to start a flight school. You know, once again, pretty full of myself. I had a fresh business degree, and I was a flight instructor, 3 years experience. So I thought, oh, I can start my own business. Well, that didn't work very well, and we had some of the worst weather I've ever seen. But I found myself out of money again, starving. A little side story to give you an idea about flight instructing at the little local airport there. I was so hungry in the mornings, I'd go out. I didn't have any money, and if the right waitress was working, I would order toast, and she would slip a few slabs of bacon in between the toast when nobody was looking, because I couldn't afford a bacon sandwich, if you can imagine. So anyway, that little era ended, and I didn't know what else to do. Mom and Dad had kind of quote unquote retired. They'd left the Philadelphia area and moved down to Ormond Beach, Florida, while I was in college. My dad had decided that his failures were because he didn't have a college degree. So at a ripe old age of 48, he decided to go to college. He moved to Ormond Beach, and he went to Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University and enrolled as a freshman.
Wow.
Yeah. So I kind of had my tail between my legs there in Ohio and just decided to go home. I loaded up a trailer and drove down there, and when I got there, unloaded the trailer at Mom's house, and Dad wasn't there. And I thought, well, that's strange. And finally, it's getting on towards dinner time. I said, so Mom, where's Dad? And she says, oh, he doesn't live here anymore. And I'm like, oh my God. She says, no, he's pledging a fraternity, and he has to live there in the fraternity house. I'm like, wait a minute, he's 49 years old and he's in a frat house? You know, he says, yeah, he's having a great time. He comes home for dinner sometimes. I'm like, okay, whatever. She tells me where it is, and I had to take my trailer back. So I drove down there and got rid of my trailer and drove around to the frat house just in time to see an ambulance coming out with my dad on a gurney. And he has slipped and fallen and broken his hip. And this is how, this is very strange the way this transpired. I was helping Dad go to school, carrying his books. He's on crutches. And one day he says, I'm going to have lunch with this guy, Greg Nelly. He's the chief instructor. And by the time lunch was over, I had a job teaching for Embry-Riddle. And that's how I found myself teaching for the two largest aviation schools in the nation. Sort of ricochet rabbit off the bumper kind of thing.
Yeah.
So, yeah, to answer your question, I did Embry-Riddle for a year. But and again, fate, serendipity, whatever chance played a part here. One day there at Embry-Riddle, I think it was maybe in February, it was miserable weather. I'm sitting there with my fellow instructors, and we're commiserating over those 4 cursed columns, because when you're a flight instructor, you're in the pattern with students. You're flying around and around and around, or you might go out to the practice area and come back. But it doesn't count for cross-country, night, multi-engine, and instrument. And those are the columns you need to get on, with an airline or even with an air taxi service. So I'm sitting in the ready room there with my instructors on a foggy day, and we don't make any money when you don't fly. And we're all bemoaning the fact that we're starving, and I picked up a trader plane. You've heard me say this before. Fate in Yellow Pages, I called it. And I flipped open the ads, and I said to these other guys, I said, well, what we need to do is we need to buy our own twin and set up a business, where we're selling block time to these kids that are graduating from college here, because they get the same problem we've got. They've got to get those 4 columns up. Why don't we start a business? We'll get a twin. We'll just fly night, IFR, cross country. We won't shut any engines down or anything, but that'll take care of our 4 columns as flight instructors, and it'll take care of the 4 columns for our student clients. And there were 19 people in the room, and 4 of them said they would join in on this. And I flipped open the trader plane, and I looked, and here's a Piper Aztec with 0-time engines for sale for $12,000. And I thought, well, this has got to be a mistake. So I went over to the phone, and yeah, it was one of these. Remember,
Oh, yeah.
remember those?
Yeah.
Let's call this thing up, and pumping the quarters into the phone, nickels or dimes or whatever. And they answered, and I heard the story of this airplane. They'd put brand new engines on it, and when they test flew it, They came back after flying it. It was in Seattle. And they put it in the hangar and went home for Christmas. And the airplane sat in the hangar with the heater running. The heater didn't shut down.
Right. Yeah, yeah.
And it was a heated hangar, and it sat there for days and days. And when they came back, all the plastic in the interior had melted and sagged. And the insurance company totaled the airplane. So yes, here's a nice Aztec, nice Piper Aztec with basically zero-time engines for $12,000. And Dad and I went,
12,000.
yeah, that was a lot of money back then. But it was insurance washout. You know, they were done with it. Dad and I went down to the local bank there. They'd never met us. And this was back when you could do this with bankers. We walked into this poor guy running the bank and sat down with him and told him this story, how we're flight instructors. We're going to buy this airplane. We're going to sell this block time. And we walked out of that bank with $12,000. And I was going to go get the airplane. I don't remember what happened, but we ended up hiring somebody else to go get it. And they determined that the hydraulic power pack on the airplane wasn't working, so the gear couldn't be retracted. And we actually got a ferry permit to bring it all the way back to Ormond Beach with the gear down. And I'll never forget, the guy got out of the airplane there at Ormond Beach and said, "God, it must have taken you forever." And he says, "Hey, I'm trying to get those columns up, you know. I don't care if I'm doing 60 miles an hour." So I said, yeah, I know about those columns.
Yeah.
And again, fate played an interesting role there with that airplane. My dad had met this mechanic student friend of his who happened to have the nose section of a Piper Aztec in his garage, and it was 4 serial numbers away from our airplane. So it had the hydraulic power pack and a heater and all the stuff we needed. And basically we spent a couple of months there, you know, putting the new interior in and fixing the items. We started a little business selling block time, and in no time at all, I think we put some 500 or 600 hours on that airplane.
Oh, wow.
In 5 or 6 months. And all of a sudden, those columns were no longer a problem for me.
Yeah. So what did you do with the interior? Did you make it into, like, was it passenger or cargo or?
Well, no, we just you could actually buy kits back then to replace the seats and the upholstery and the ceiling and all that. And we modified some things, but basically just wanted the airplane to be functional so that flight instructors could fly it with these students. And you'll love this story. You know, my dad became an examiner, and it was great because Greg and Tony and I were the instructors. We'd fly the airplane, and then Dad would get these students and do their airline transport pilot license in the airplane. Embry-Riddle didn't have an ATP program at that time. We did, so this was just a natural progression for these kids from Embry-Riddle. So one day I got called into the boss's office there at Embry-Riddle, and he asks me about this ATP thing we're doing. Of course, I spill my guts. I'm telling him what a great program it is and how you do this, and you fly at night and cross-country and multi-engine and all that. And I get done with the conversation, and he looks at me and he says, "That's all very good. You're fired." And
What?
I said, "What?" He says, "Yeah, conflict of interest." I said, "Well, what do you mean?" And I said, "Embry-Riddle doesn't have an ATP program." And he looked at me and says, "We do now." And that's how I lost my job at Embry-Riddle.
God.
Yeah. But to get back to Corrosion Corner, one of the things I would do is we'd get in the airplane with students and we'd fly down the coast and shoot and approach and miss, shoot and approach and miss, and then land and change seats. And you'd do 2 students at a time. And I really liked going to Miami because that's where the big airplanes were. They were still flying DC-6s and Convaires and C-46s and DC-3s. And that's what I really wanted to do. And one day while I was down there, I finally kind of broke the code and was able to get a promise from somebody that I'd go fly a DC-6 with them. And that's how, you know, I broke in down there in Corrosion Corner. And what was really funny is once I was involved there, all my flight instructor friends, I invited them and they all came down. I think we had 12 of us living in my little 2-bedroom apartment at one point. And the good news is we were always gone on trips. So we were like hot bunking, you know, we're all going out flying DC-6s.
And that's when you kind of formed your transport companies that were probably more respected down in Corrosion Corner than most of the companies.
Well, I learned the ropes there in Corrosion Corner. It was kind of a gray area, I guess, in the regulations. people could go offshore and get with a foreign nation and create a company, an airline company. And they could buy a U.S. registered airplane and put U.S. crews in it, but operate it as a foreign air carrier because they were flying for whatever island nation you want to name. And here in the U.S., they were recognized as an FAR 129 company. Well, FAR 129 was only about 3 pages of regulations, where the commercial operating certificate under FAR 121 was more like 130 pages, and it was a truly regulated, truly monitored industry. So it was one of these places where folks that were very keen on profit could kind of sneak in and break the rules, not really break them, but it was certainly an oddity. And I learned the ropes of that. And there were several landmark accidents that happened just before I got down there. And I kind of had my finger on the pulse that the FAA was, I don't know that they were really on a campaign to change it all, but I could see the writing on the wall. You know, the cowboy days of Corrosion Corner where, I mean, the pilots didn't get any flight training. The airplanes didn't get any maintenance, but they were operating with full commercial certificate. And I could see that that was going to come to an end. So that was the inspiration to start Challenge Air Transport, which is the company you're talking about. Dad and I
And you
decided
wrote the
we could.
manuals.
Yeah, from scratch, from zero. Mom, I built a fold down desk in my mom's laundry room right above the washing machine. And I had a typewriter and I had one of the first ever printers. I mean, that was a big deal. My neighbors came to see the printer. And I was able to start from zero and wrote a full FAR 121 airline certificate. It was the only one, as far as I know, ever issued by a Flight Standards District office. We went up to Jacksonville, which was our local FAA office, and we asked them, hey, can we create a 121 certificate here under your guidance and, you know, the auspices of your office? And they said, well, we don't see why not. So we did it.
Yeah.
About the time we got done, we got fully certificated. It was wonderful. We did a ground school and all the flight training right there at Ormond Beach in an old Curtiss C-46. About the time we were finishing up, some of the hierarchy there at the Jacksonville FSDO kept hinting around saying, you know, when you get this airline certificate, you know, what are you going to do with it? There's no cargo here in Jacksonville. And the day after we got the certificate, we headed for Miami, which is where the cargo was.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was, I think we played a little hooky on our own there. But, you know, Challenge Air Transport was really pretty cool because we got the certificate and we went to work there in Miami. And it wasn't long before one of the outfits that I'd worked for on the DC-6 belonged to Charles Lawson. And he came to me and said, hey, you know, we've been watching you and very keen on what you're doing. And he had a dream to take all of his companies. He had all these separate companies and separate airplanes under the 129 thing I described. He wanted to bring them under one roof and make them 121. And we worked out a deal where he actually purchased Challenge Air Transport. And I helped train a lot of the DC-6 pilots and helped get a lot of the airplanes up to 121 and everything, you know, as they converted to the new way of doing things. It was pretty cool. I was director of training. Once again, that teaching thing has been the most important part of my whole career. So it's been great fun.
What did Lawson do with Challenger Transport in the end?
That was kind of a funny story too. We got it all up and running, and I kind of, I don't know, I had a run of experiences there in July of '77 that kind of shook me up. I kind of thought, you know, I need to get into the jets, which was almost sounds like heresy now because I love the piston engine stuff so much. But
Yeah.
I decided, you know, all of the columns, those cursed columns, had gone away in my logbook. I was now well qualified to go to the airlines. And I tried with everybody and I couldn't get on anywhere. I didn't have any military background and I didn't have 20/20 vision, which back then were pretty much requirements. But I got a call one day from Western Airlines, who had turned me down once, and they apparently were scrambling trying to put together an unprecedented 13th class. They only did 12 classes a year. And they called me on December the 5th, I'll never forget, and said, could I be in class on December the 18th? And I immediately said yes, you know, and hung up the phone with them. I was pretty excited. And went and sat down with Charles Lawson, my boss, and said, hey, I'm going to go. And he said, yeah, we saw it, always knew you would, and you should, you know, take our severance package. And I didn't even know I had a severance package. I sat up and listened, and he says, yeah, you're going to get stock in the company, this, that, and the other. And I'm like, it didn't mean anything to me. And I had my eyes on this Volkswagen bus that I wanted to buy because I needed something to live in when I got out to LA to go to class. Because, they didn't pay hardly anything while you were in training. And he said, yeah, you can take the severance package and you'll get stock and everything else. And he said, or you could take cash. And he said, I strongly advise you should take the severance package because we're going to do some great things with this certificate, but I can't tell you what. And I'm like, yeah, I've heard that before. I'm not very smart. I took the cash. And ultimately, Challenge Air Transport twisted and turned and ended up being called UPS.
My God.
That was good. That was good, right?
Can,
I
yeah,
still have the
can you imagine the stock?
I still have the Volkswagen.
Yeah.
I'm still driving the same car 40 years later. That tells you something, right? So yeah, another aviation success story.
Yeah. Well, that's pretty funny. But it does show like how connected the aviation community and stories are, because I mean that something like that, that was just a transport thing, small transport company back in the day, it would become something as big as UPS, you know. That's
Well,
pretty
I
incredible.
can't take full credit. They got merged in and
Yeah,
cross-pollinated and absorbed into the UPS thing that we see now today.
I've seen it though. Like if you look up the history of Challenge Air Transport, you will see the links that link it to
Yeah.
UPS and what it became. So it's pretty
Well,
interesting.
when I think back that at one point when I was still typing the manuals on my mom's fold-down desk over the typewriter and the washing machine, at that point I owned 100% of that company, all of
Wow.
it. And as it developed, I got dad and everything else going and spread it out
Yeah.
amongst us. Missed
Yeah.
it by that much.
Yeah. So
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 yeah,
then you began a career with Western, and then they're like the timeline just kind of jumps and jumps and jumps because you flew with Western and you flew with Delta for years and years, and it ended up being like 40 years by the time that you retired.
there were a lot of twists and turns in there. Western only lasted for 2 years. I got furloughed.
Right.
And as if I didn't know better, what do you suppose I did? I came back involved with Dad and my brother, who were still involved with Corrosion Corner. Dad had decided that he was going to rebuild a Douglas DC-7, and he had purchased a Hulk up in Ortner, Ohio. And he and my brother were living in Volkswagen vans under the wing in the wintertime, if you can imagine. And they were rebuilding this Hulk, and I went and joined them. And my poor mother was back in Ormond Beach, writing the checks and working the books of this crazy thing my dad was doing. And finally, we got the airplane ready and got it down to Ormond Beach to put the finishing touches on it. And the first time she saw the airplane, she saw those great big four-bladed propellers and gave my dad a hug. And our favorite show tune for years and years has been Man of La Mancha. And my mom looked at those big propellers and concluded that those were like windmills and that my dad was Don Quixote and we were all jousting windmills. And that's how the company got named La Mancha Air, which was our second foray into Corrosion Corner, a second attempt to, be the clean, fine-haired boys, in the pretty corrupt market that Corrosion Corner was. But that operation, I think, was clinically a success. Financially, it ended up a disaster. But, we operated for 4 years, and the airplanes, we ended up with 4 DC-7s. It was pretty impressive. And an amazing experience for me. But I got recalled back to Western and went back to work. And no sooner had I gotten back that, I started teaching for them again. And right after that, Delta came along and bought Western. And yeah, 40 years later, found
Yeah.
myself in a 777 saying, on my last landing in LA, saying, okay, now what?
Yeah. Pretty amazing. And then you started flying for Kenmore, and the story kind of goes
Well,
into that.
my wife, bless her heart, the age mandatory retirement at the airlines has always been a controversial thing. and it was age 60 for years and years. It was mandatory you left at 60. And as that approached, I became kind of, I don't know, maybe not negative, but concerned that, what am I going to do with myself? I've been flying airliners my whole life. And she said, you should do something about it. And, I wanted to get back into the flying off the water, which is one of my all-time most favorite things. And again, the logbooks and the columns, I'd somewhere along the way gotten a float plane rating and taught a little bit in float planes, but really didn't have much time. So I got looking around thinking, okay, well, maybe I could fly float planes commercially. Well, you had to have, depending on which company, you had to have 250 or even 500 hours of float time to do that. And there was no way to get the time because nobody was operating float planes. So I started goofing around up in Seattle on layovers, and I stumbled into a situation there. Local flight school had a float plane that we're having mechanical troubles with. And I told the guy my story that, yeah, I'm going to retire soon and I'd like to fly float planes. And he literally pulled the desk drawer open and threw the keys to this airplane to me. He says, if you can make that SOB run, you can run it. It's yours. Run that side of my flight school for me. And I was like, okay. Yeah, I was able to determine the problems with the airplane and got it tuned in, and it ran great. And my plan was at age 60 to fly, every summer and until I had the 250 hours. And, maybe by the time I was 63, 64, or whatever, I could fly commercially in float planes. Well, much to my surprise, I was able to put some marketing ideas in with the gals that ran his marketing department. And I flew 250 hours in that airplane the first summer.
Wow.
All of a sudden, again, the columns were gone. So to answer your question, how did I end up at Kenmore? Kenmore has a flight school and they had an examiner on staff. So the trick was to get my students ready. I was flying for the school, which is down at the other end of Lake Washington there in Renton. I get my students ready and we fly up to Kenmore for their check ride. And while they were flying the check ride, I'm in there pressing the flesh at Kenmore saying, I really want to go to work here. I think they got tired of me, to tell you the truth.
Yeah.
I managed to get on. Somewhere in that process, the age 60 rule got pushed to 65. So I didn't retire from the major airlines until I was 65 years old. But by then I had the full-time job with Kenmore, or I had the offer of it. I was still part-timing. And I went pretty much full-time there until COVID hit. And then Kenmore actually shut down, first time in their history,
Right.
because of that. And so that's how I morphed into doing what I'm doing now.
Right. So you flew up in that area that I lived in for years, in the Seashell Inlet area.
Oh, yeah.
And stuff like that. So that was kind of interesting, that knowing that you knew that area. That's
I still report that was, I think, probably the best flying, mile for mile, ounce for ounce. And again, if I could rewrite the curricula for up and coming pilots, I'd say go fly in gliders and then go fly float planes. And then, if you could go fly commercially in a float plane, that's fantastic.
yeah. Yeah, I worked on the water there for over a decade, and it was such a regular sound to hear the big R985s on those beavers all the time. Every day you would hear it, and in any weather, they'd be flying in any weather.
Yeah, there were some days, where it was really marginal visibility. And then luckily they changed the regulations and had put some regulations in place for both ceiling and visibility and made it safer. Because the topic of scud running is something you and I could spend an entire podcast on. I've lost so many friends where they're just
Oh, really?
flying when they shouldn't be. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So, and then the rest is just pretty much recent, because you flew. I mean, you started working on the A26 and kind of a little bit on the Martin right around the same time when I came out to Arizona here to Valley Airport. So that's pretty incredible timeline, But it's great because it kind of gives us an idea of how you got to what you're doing today.
Yeah, diagnosing what causes the madness. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was warped at an early age and never recovered.
Well,
I can't believe that it's coming up on 5 years ago that I first started working on A26. That was supposed to be a 90-day project. So I can now
yeah,
report that we're 5 years into a 90-day project. But that in turn is what spawned the interest in the Martin and waking that airplane up and going down the path we've gone down to, determine that we can bring the airplane back and actually make it fly again. It's been pretty exciting.
yeah. So one thing though is I have one question about, well, I mean, we're Happy New Year right now, 2026. Okay, so we've got now like literally well, be 19, but 18 because you want to be flying that in June probably uh,
It
to
occurred to
take it to
me,
Oshkosh in 2027.
that my vanity should kick in here, and that if I was to fly it on June 4th, my birthday, that'd be pretty cool.
That
So
would be
yeah,
very
June
cool.
4th,
And
that would be the,
we've got a couple of interesting places that we could go before Oshkosh with that plane. That would be pretty epic. The other
but we're
thing
not
that I
telling.
Yeah, the other thing that I think is it would be a really really great thing to do because the last time you flew that plane, you flew it into Valley, Arizona, and who was with you in the cockpit of that plane?
That was my son, Doug Whitesell, who's now a pilot with Delta Airlines. And it was
Hmm.
the very first big airplane he got to fly. And the fact that he was doing it in the same seat in the very same airplane that I did it, that's pretty bizarre, pretty cool. Um, I'd never flown a
Give
big
him,
airplane.
I
Go
think you
ahead.
better give him some notice and get him to book a little bit of time off when that plane is starting to fly around again. It would be wonderful to have him in the cockpit with you, you know, and two generations of white cells.
We're gonna have to put a sales job on him because he's pretty keen on the jets now. But yeah, that would be cool. I'm looking at my little thing that pops up every morning. It's called Countdown, and it says we have 570 days to go.
Ooh,
Yeah. The good news is we have 570 days. The bad news is we only
you
have
only have
570 days.
570
Yes.
days.
This picture was taken on the last ever flight that was on the way to
Yeah.
Valley.
And was
And
that taken by Graham?
no, this was taken from a friend of mine who flew Chase over there just to bring us home, Dr. Bill Scott. Yeah. So
Yeah.
I'm
So
looking
another
forward.
thing we're going to do, though, is your very good friend who you've known for many, many years, Graham, is an incredible aviation photographer. And he is an insanely thorough aviation researcher. You give him any plane and he'll find out everything about it. And we want to get a page up on the website with basically it'll be Graham's Corner where he can, really go into details about the histories of a lot of these planes, especially the planes that you had experience with in your family as being part of the flying white cells.
Yesterday was another example. I thought about the Widgeon and scrounged up the N number and the serial number and was groping around trying to find information on it myself. I sent him a text, and this morning he had all of the answers about the airplane, all the information that you could have. I've never known anybody who's quite so thorough at it. And again, the madness runs deep there. He's thorough about it because he absolutely loves doing it. So
Yeah, we'll have to bring him in on a future podcast. That would be fun.
yeah. Well, one fine day we'll all be together in Valley. That would
Yeah,
be cool.
that's right. Well, I guess that's it for this podcast, and we will be back again with some more interesting stuff very soon.
Looking forward to that.
Yeah,
We'll see
Happy
you
New
see
Year.
you in Valley real soon. Happy New Year.